Hi, my name's Alex, and I'm the host of Favourite Positions. I am so excited to be joined by the amazing Lily.
Hi, my name's Lily Kiriakou and I'm the founder of Rezilien.
We are co hosting a series of roundtable discussions, and we are delighted to have you listening to them.
Today's episode unpacks a crucial business challenge that people, leaders, and organisations, regardless of size and industry, are grappling with every single day. And that is whether adaptability is reaching its limit or whether organisations need to create the conditions in which it can thrive.
We've brought together an inspiring group of business leaders to dissect the topic. Without further ado, let's get into it. So, to start with, I'd love to share who we've got in the room and how each of you bring this topic into your workplace. So, could I ask you each to briefly introduce yourselves, the work that you do, the environment that you've led in, and why the strain of continuous change has become personally relevant in your experience? David, over to you.
Lovely to be here, first and foremost. David Fern. So I'm Vice President of AI at NTT Data, who are essentially the BT of Japan. My role at NTT is fundamentally helping our customers to embrace and transform in AI. It's my personal and also my professional area of research as well. So I'm doing a PhD in human AI symbiosis. So how can we bring AI and humans closer together? How do I lead change? Well, I think it's semi-self-explanatory that change is kind of fundamental to my job. I don't think we've ever been. I say this almost every single time I have this chance to express this point of view that we've never been in a faster changing time when it comes to technology, but we really haven't ever been in a faster changing time. The gap between like academia and commercialization is like nearly invisible. It used to be years, and it's like almost commercialization is almost leading academia now. And as I say, I've led many changes in technology and transformation, data, predominantly data and AI led changes in organizations to help them provide better data led decision making, automation through AI. And actually my PhD, my area of research came about because we were doing a technology led change in an organization. We did the change, everything was looking really good, really cool AI system, and literally we had the real humans on the ground start to turn around and tell us they didn't want a boss that was an AI. They didn't want to be told what to do by Terminator. And all of a sudden I started going, oh, we actually need to put a lot more thought into how we change the workforce to embrace technology, and specifically kind of AI, where it's more than just technology, it's an intelligence, and how we need to kind of harmonize that change. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
We're so glad to hear.
Thanks for being here.
My name is Rebecca Tovey, and I am the Group Director of People, Transformation and Change. And I work at Amdaris, which is an insight company. And I've been working in the HR field in the IT sector for 12 years now. And over the last few years, I would say that I've had this kind of internal conflict in a lot of the work that I'm doing, because I sit in the boardroom with the leaders of the business. We work obviously in tech, so AI is massively affecting our business. And often I see the need for the pace of transformation and change to be accelerated because of the way AI is impacting our business and therefore our people. And I believe in our ambitious strategies around that. However, I can see our teammates are experiencing burnout fatigue, confusion. Often there's a lot of misalignment when it comes to change. So I'm really passionate about, okay, well, how can we transform and change as a business, but making sure that we're putting the people at the heart of that transformation and change. And something that I'm really actually happy and excited about is last year we made the decision to build a new transformation and change team, a dedicated team in our business. We're very agile. We know that we move quickly, but actually what's happening is we've got various parts of our business all moving at speed, very excited and passionate, but often moving in very different directions. So that team's there to make sure that we're almost like a air traffic controller, making sure that we're making the right change at the right time. It's landing well for our people, and our people can ultimately be part of this exciting road we see coming ahead, rather than feeling like something's happening to them and they're not part of that journey.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We can't wait to get into this. And Fintan.
Yes, I'm also delighted to be here. It's very interesting to see different perspectives from different people, particularly from a generational perspective, which I'm in Gen X. I'm at the end of the top end of my career, so I've had very different experiences.
Mm.
So at the moment, I work for a consulting firm, a US consulting firm, a smaller firm called Protivity, and I work predominantly on change and transformation. And my focus is really on the human dynamic. So around all the process and technology and AI, I look at the human and how do they consume change, and that's where the challenge has always been in any sort of transformation. My background was commercial. I worked in banking, commodities for about 30 years. And I led change around process and systems in those environments as well. So in particularly within trading systems within banks, and then the associated accounting and risk associated with that. So a lot of that. So I've brought that into the consulting world. So I talk a lot to clients about the challenges they have around change. AI is now in everybody's lips. How do we best use AI? How do we deploy it? How do we get our people used to it? How do we put people at the heart of it? What you said, Rebecca, and what you said, Dan, about the challenge of actually when you roll it out, you kind of think you're all set, and then people go, actually, we don't like that because we don't want to be driven. So that's the challenge that every client that we talk to is seeing. So it's not unusual to hear that. So why it's particularly relevant to me at the moment is because I've actually reverted back in to do an in-house change on a technology platform. So I've been doing that for the European entities. And again, the challenges come up about how do people adopt change and how do they actually change their ways of working. And so it's all very challenging. And then you've got this layer of AI and people just don't know where that's going. They don't really know how best to deploy it. It's not consistent across organizations. How different generations actually use it is really interesting. Lily knows we've been doing a piece of work with the London School of Economics, and one of the things we've talked about is how is AI consumed within organizations, and it's actually really down to training and how people are trained. It's not generational. People say, oh yeah, the Gen Z are great adopters. Not true. The consumption and the alignment with AI is really down to training, and it's consistent across all the generations. So we found that really interesting. So it's really relevant to me because I've seen a lot of change in my career, but the pace of it, as you said, is extraordinary now. If you think about what we went through with COVID and the pivot we need to make to technology systems where we're working virtual, that was always going to come, but that was accelerated enormously. And now we've got the layer of other AI-enabled tools, and it's just how do you keep pace with it? And people do see burnout, and people are tired, and so I know in the questions that that Alex and Lee have posed us, and we get onto it, and are we reaching our peak adaptability? We'll get to that point. But that's my interest. I'm really interested in just the whole debate generally.
Brilliant. And we're delighted to have you here because that angle is one that isn't spoken about enough. So you're all bringing different angles, and that's why you're here, and that's why it's so exciting. So that actually puts us quite nicely into setting the scene for us. So we've all spoken about this offline and we've all ranted about it extensively. But let's put it into scene for the audience, which is leaders talk about burnout. They talk about relentless change. They talk about adaptability being the biggest competitive advantage for people and a resilient organization. They talk about the importance of being able to transition their people fast enough in order to be able to adapt to change. But what we're still seeing is that performance is still wobbling within organizations, even though that discussion is constantly happening. So what is actually happening on the lower ground? Where's it going wrong? Is adaptability actually reaching its peak? Or are we only just scratching the surface, and are organizations unconsciously undermining those conditions that are required in order for it to thrive?
I don't get to see it often from the depths that the both of you probably do, and obviously you guys as well. I see it from very much the let's do this, it's all positive. But if I had to give one big indicator that I think indicates to me either a high degree of adoption or a low degree of adoption, and it kind of comes into the burnout. I don't think it's necessarily burnout in individuals. I think it's just burnout in the change team themselves, in the function of the organization that is there to actually own and drive and continually kind of ignite people's excitement about change. Because I think if you don't have, being in change is a really challenging part of the business, because you've got to constantly be positive. You've got to be constantly seeing past the chaos and the confusion and the short-term disruption and looking to the bigger picture. And I think, to the point that's been made by the other two panelists, like, we've had so much change recently. The tech is moving so quickly, and that is bringing, whether we like it or not, that is a massive fundamental change agent in organizations. And I just don't see very good change discipline in organizations. I see a lot of, here's a tool, just get on and use it. And I've seen that consistently with AI. I don't see well-managed change.
So would you say that humans are being treated as almost as though they're systems to be upgraded? You click on a switch and they automatically have adapted to the new norm?
Yes, and interestingly, it leads to two very divergent behaviors. And I think the behaviors are largely, you can kind of correlate them to demographics of age and experience. So you've got, when you don't introduce change in a meaningful way, you've got a demographic of individuals who are the younger generation, who are the iPhone generation. They overtrust the technology and just basically embrace it like it's TikTok, scrolling away and trusting it implicitly. And then you've got the older generation, probably my generation, and
and Finton's generation.
It's okay. I won't club you in with it, Finton,
That's okay.
but yes,
I can take it.
Who are much more cynical and probably have a healthy level of cynicism, verging on unhealthy level of cynicism about new technologies, and therefore undertrust it and kind of want more human in the loop than is probably necessary. And more kind of governance over that's necessary. But then in this middle, you've got this kind of middle ground, which is actually the sweet spot, which I don't see a lot of people landing the technology well in.
What exactly is the sweet spot?
The sweet spot is healthy skepticism.
Yeah.
It is not over trusting it. So, you just basically copy and paste what ChatGPT said into an email and send it on to, which I see all the time.
Yeah.
But you don't also fear it, and you don't, actively go out of your way to kind of avoid it. You embrace it, but you embrace it with a level of professional control. And I just don't see that being taught well or explained well. I see tools just being thrust in front of individuals in a workplace and go, right, get on with it. We've done our job now. We've bought the license. We've implemented the tech. Just get on with it. Change is such an afterthought. I think it's fundamentally, my research is all about, this is a massive, massive hole.
Is the whole change in itself, or is it the investment in the people side of change?
I think there's much better people to answer that question on this panel. But if I had to just give my one-word answer, it's both.
I have another caveat to that I want to bracket for you, but we'll come back because we're on the specific topic. Rebecca. Yes. I want you to answer this through an M&A lens, because you're doing a very, very big job at the moment integrating two very different businesses into one. And you've been doing so for the past couple of years. And as we've discussed this offline, you know that there's been studies by McKinsey, PwC, and Harvard Business Review that actually talk about something like 70% of acquirers state cultural issues to be the number one reason why value creation was hampered or why they weren't able to progress operations. So where do you see adaptability issues manifesting when you're trying to bring two very different cultures together? And what are you seeing on the ground to evidence that?
Throughout my HR career, I've gone through 10 acquisitions, 9 of them being on the side of acquiring smaller businesses, and then 1 being the acquired business. And something I would say is that historically, in those 9 acquisitions where we were on the acquiring side, it was very much, we acquire a business, we have a 6-month plan, and then we follow it for every single business that we integrate. And then by the end of those 6 months, they're fully aligned with our values and our processes and our tools. If we look back at history, we know humans are adaptable. You can think about electricity, and then you can think about internet, you can think about the pandemic, and there's lots and lots of examples we can talk about. Humans are adaptable, but the challenge that we're seeing is the pace of it. And I think that what's going to need to happen is that change needs to stop being looked at like a transition or a plan that's going to happen for 6 months and then we move on. It's going to be a continuous loop where change never actually stops. And I think that ties back to values and behaviors, and when you've got lots of different people coming together to work towards a shared vision, going back to the acquisition and alignment point.
Yeah.
But then also thinking about how AI is transforming the world and subsequently a lot of our businesses.
Yeah.
We need to kind of shift from that pattern of, okay, well, what does good look like? How do we reward people? How do we motivate people? Good standards and stability and structure and good performance. Well, actually, we want there to be this continuous loop where we're always changing, and it's that continuous learning mindset and helping people see that actually what we want to drive now are behaviors rather than repeatable actions that you do every day in your job role, for example.
Yeah.
We want to incentivize people. We want people to be more creative and innovative. So I think, yeah, the change isn't necessarily going to stop like it was in the past. And it's something that we actually need to now create as an environment and think about, okay, well, how do you motivate and inspire people to see things through a much more open lens, and almost that change is just happening without you even realizing it.
Yeah.
One of the things you just said there really started me thinking. You mentioned about like trying to pick the best of both cultures and kind of bring it, or best of both organizations and bring it together, which is a very challenging thing because there's a lot of emotion involved in these things. But when you throw in the dimension of like actually some of the things that we valued when we acquired that organization, some of the operational teams, things like that, actually the reality is if we bring them together, we're actually kind of not taking advantage of new technologies, AI, that could probably do the job better. So actually, how do you take into account not just the good of the two organizations, but also marrying in the good of new technologies as well, and kind of say, actually, we kind of don't need either of you, those bits anymore, because actually we're gonna augment heavily with this, or we need a lot less of you, or we need you in a very different way.
Yeah.
Appreciate it's not an easy question. That's why I asked it, because this is a real challenge.
Yeah. It is absolutely a challenge. And I think the thing is, what we're seeing is that the technology on the market, plus also what our clients are asking of us, is moving faster than we as an organization are. So going back to that question about are humans at, breaking point of adaptability, I actually think that the focus needs to be predominantly on, is your organization set up to adapt that quickly? Because yes, we need to take people through that journey. But if your business isn't set up to adapt quickly, then how are you even going to get there afterwards? And technology is obviously a really good example of that. We talk a lot about, AI agents and AI LLMs, and how we do our work and deliver for clients is going to be significantly different. Do we actually know in reality what that's going to look like long term? Do we know what that looks like this year, and then next year, and then the year after that? And then how do you manage that change as well? I don't really think it's going to be structured in that, it looks like this today and then it will look like this tomorrow. I think it's definitely a very complex, evolving piece where you're going to have lots of different normalities over time until we find that new norm when it comes to AI technologies and how people work with it. Everyone's job role is a good example of that. I don't think job roles are going to change overnight. I think naturally over the next few years, and probably even further, our job roles are going to continuously evolve and change based on how we're working with AI and how we're using it day to day. A developer is a really good example we were talking about earlier. A developer traditionally has written code and then they deliver a piece of software for their client. Well, naturally over time that's going to turn into prompt text engineering, and then it's going to turn into using LLMs instead of doing it yourself. They might even transform into product owners over time. So I think roles will evolve depending on how the technology is embraced.
Yeah. And I think just to build on that, I think the other dimension you need to look at is the fact that the technology is getting so much better so quickly, like quicker than anyone could expect. Quicker than, so I literally live, breathe AI. And honestly, I've been blown away by the pace at which these tools have gone from, yeah, you can do a bit of this, to actually it's pretty good at this, to actually it's better than any coder on the planet, to actually it's better not just doing the coding, but the entire management of the project. And that kind of thing will bleed out into other areas very quickly. So being able to predict which roles will be valuable from an acquisition, I don't envy your task.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry.
So you're almost alluding to a complete reimagination of the two businesses into one by adopting AI and also cultivating and integrating cultures at the same time.
Yeah.
Both of you.
Yeah. I guess the other thing to just, comment on is from an acquisition perspective, you've mentioned a couple times there that you make an acquisition because there's something you like about that business, right? You like the products that they're delivering, or you like their values and things like that. Well, every single business is going through this as well, whether you like it or not. It's not, as if a specific business that works in an AI will be touched by this more than another business. Everyone's going through this transformation, yes, at different paces. Yes, they're doing it differently depending on their business and their values and, how they make decisions. But I don't think that anyone has worked it out. I think we're all working it out together.
You are 100% right there. Anyone who turns around and tells you, we're sorted, is lying.
Yes.
Absolutely lying.
Yeah.
I have one more point to add to that, and then we're going to come on to you, Fintan, because there's a particular area that I'd like you to bring into this.
There's loads of stuff that's been said there.
Yeah,
I'm really interested on.
Is the debate going to
No,
begin?
no, it's not debate, but it's just a perspective on things you've said and my own experiences and maybe some challenge as well on what you've said.
Let me inject, because I think you'll be particularly interested in this one. So you've been very vocal, David, about your frustration around how organizations, not people, are approaching AI and why it's not yet producing the value that it should be producing. And MIT came out with a report late last year that said that 95% of AI rollouts didn't produce any ROI or the value that was expected. So from that perspective, where do you think adaptability comes into that specifically from an innovation point of view?
So first and foremost, let's just completely discredit that report because it was utterly, it was a report that was written based on like 50 people's opinions.
Okay.
And also, I'd like to say, to think that 5% of organizations are publicly stating that they've had meaningful P&L increase or efficiencies from AI that's only been around for like 3 years. That's damn impressive. So I'm going to spin that in a different way.
Interesting. Okay.
Why do I think, once again though, but if you look at the good bit about that report was that it kind of highlighted that tech check, as in the technology is here.
What do you mean by that?
As in the technology is not the problem.
Okay.
People are focusing on, it's the technology is the problem. It's
Yeah.
this. It's not the technology is the problem. It's very much the cultural adaptation, the introduction of this crazy, and fundamentally, it's not a technology. Stop calling it a technology. It's an intelligence. And the quicker that we think of it as intelligence, the quicker that we think of it as something that is much more akin to another human being sitting next to us. And I know this sounds a little bit dystopian, and I'm very biased about this, so please shoot me down as much as you want afterwards. And I'm trying not to anthropomorphize. But fundamentally, it is an intelligence. It's not an app. It's not going to produce the same outcome every time. It works, it thinks, it interprets. We've even seen like sparks of synthetic introspection. This thing's actually able to curate its own thoughts as it's kind of going through its inference and giving you an answer back. So, it's, if you think a bit through that lens, it is very much actually you need to introduce it in a way that is much more human than you'd introduce just like a new CRM system.
So what I'm taking away from that is if it was introduced as a colleague, a type of colleague, a type of intelligence, you've regarded this as a different type of culture almost, in the same way that we almost have to learn other cultures and find the gap between the communication styles.
So let me give you one example of where it's worked really, really well.
Please.
I think it was a really simple thing they did. So this is BYN Mellon. I was on a panel with one of their execs at the FT forum in December, and she literally said, "We treat our AI like another member of staff. We give it a ID number, we give it an email address, we give it a Teams account, and people engage with it really proactively. They introduce it, they bring it into meetings. They, it has a name. It's actually called, so BIMLM was actually started by Alexander Hamilton. So they've actually named it Eliza after his wife. So literally it's got a name, it's got a personality, it's got a staff ID, it's got a place in the organization, it has a reporting line. All of these things help people to understand, okay, where's it fit? I think one of the biggest things to successful introduction of AI is to build a common mental model with your staff so they can understand where it lives, what it does, why it's there, and that it has some level of, if it does something really stupid, you can go to its boss and say, you need to fix it, rather than this kind of amorphous, ephemeral thing that just floats around the organization. So yeah, I thought that was really cool. And from a massive bank like them,
Of course.
to do such a cool thing, honestly, I actually turned to him on the panel and just went, that is amazing. Because that really was amazing.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it, and I think a lot of people would, and I think you're going to bring this in if I can imagine, but I think a lot of people would probably attest, myself included, before I really started playing around with AI, that you think of it initially as a tool or as ChatGPT or a chatbot. And when you really understand what AI is capable of and you start to implement it in your workflow and you connect it to your day to day, it becomes it becomes a brain. It becomes something huge
It's like anything, right? Once we understand how to use it, it stops being a search engine or a tool and it starts being a real collaborator. Do you know what? We've seen this over and over again. Like there's a great Steve Jobs talk that he does where he describes what the television was used for the first 30 years of its existence. For the first 30 years, it was a glorified radio. They'd literally put a radio in front of a television camera and play it through the TV until they really started to embrace actual moving pictures and realize the business model and the the consumption model for it.
It's the 100th years anniversary of the launch of the television. Did you know that?
I did not know.
Just in January. And John Logie Baird, and it was not celebrated publicly.
That's really sad.
It's really interesting. That's just something. That's a free one.
We love a free one.
Yeah.
Right, Mr. Canavan, the floor is yours.
So there's so much been said there. So just I'll try and do it. I wrote down some things there. There was so many things, but interestingly, you talk about the member of the team. So we're doing a piece of work for a client, and that's how we've said, this is so and so. They're a member of your team, and this is how we've deployed it. Now there has been challenge in terms of how they actually have embraced that new team member, because there's a whole cultural thing going on about, and there's a little bit of trust. They need to build up confidence that they can rely on their team member on that. But they have named it, and it's a member of their team. And some of the community are going, that's fantastic. So that definitely resonates.
Good.
It was interesting what you're saying about adoption and like the 6-month plan. So the model is the 100-day action plan, which we've all seen. And we drive and we tick boxes and we try and get all the things in. But the cultural part of it, as you said, that's the hard, because it's about people. You can do all the systems integrations. You can throw out systems. You can throw out processes. You can throw out people, which is hard. But unless you get the cultural elements of it right, it'll never be successful. And like, I work for a very big organization, a very big bank. We did lots of acquisitions, and some of them were good and some of them were not. And the ones that were not, they gave up in the end. They just got rid of it. Because they just couldn't bring in it. The value creation wasn't worth the cost of actually trying to get them on board to do the things they wanted to do. So that's definitely true. You talked about a little bit about change management. So you talked a lot about how do you get it in, how do you get people to use it. It's about change management. And it's interesting what you said about the burnout of the change management teams.
Yes.
So interesting. So that's why I've pivoted to internal projects, because I was client facing for the last 8 years. For the last year, I've been working on the internal team because they're burned out. So I've come in with sort of a fresh pair of eyes, slightly different experience from a commercial environment. So I've led the change management, and it's change management. So it's not process or technology implement, it's change management, which is about humans.
Yeah.
And it's about training, and it's about education, and it's about getting them, how do they adopt technology? How do they adapt their ways of working? And it's all about humans and recognizing how do you manage that community. So that change management, it doesn't matter whether it's AI or whether it's changing a process or changing a machine piece in a car. It's all about managing the people through that cycle. And there's lots of models about adoption, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's about people.
One of the challenges I'm certainly seeing myself, but then hearing from a lot of my connections, is when it comes to that change management, and you could use the ADCAR model or whatever you're talking about, typically to take people through change, you need a certain amount of time to do that.
Yes.
So when we're seeing our teams and our businesses needing to make change at a much faster rate, for example, potentially even every quarter you're going through a brand new change loop, how do you make sure that change management is still as successful as it was maybe 4 years ago, now that we're moving at such a faster pace?
Because you have to keep it refreshed. So interesting. And I agree with what you said about things. Organizations will have to just be on a continuous cycle. If you think back, and I can look back and I can say this because I'm older. If I looked at the FT 100 today and looked at it 30 years ago, it's unrecognizable, with the exception of maybe 5 or 6 big organizations, because they didn't adapt. So they failed.
Yeah.
So when you talk about adaptability and change, so organizations that will survive have to adapt. And the better organizations and the ones that are really going to be successful with AI will just have leaders in there that will see this is a game changer for us.
Yep.
We have to be at the front of it, but we have to lead it by example. So that leadership is really important to have that change cycle. But you also need people who are skilled at it. You need people who like change, who like being involved, and who actually genuinely like people. The technology piece in the process, like I'm technology agnostic process now, but I like people.
That helps.
And I like working in organizations. But you see, the interesting thing, I know a lot of change people who actually don't actually like people. They're in change management. Oh yeah, I'm the change manager. And I'm going, well, you didn't speak to them very nicely, you know, but that's really important. But like there was a couple of other things, the change mindset you talked about.
Yes.
And how do you make that flow? And you have to start really simply and do very simple things with people and say, and just get them to think about more broadly about their own position. Where do they think they can be? What will this change give them and the opportunity to do? What's in it for them?
Yeah.
That's the biggest part of change, is you have to explain to the community, this is going to make your life better. This is going to make your job more interesting. You know, using AI to do, you know, very mundane stuff, that's great. But actually you can use it to do a lot more interesting stuff, and you can learn. So it's about, how does your career change? And you talked about jobs. There are jobs which will exist in 2 years' time we haven't even thought about.
100%.
Yeah.
So the idea of having roles will adapt. But I think what will happen in work is that we won't do defined roles. You'll have capabilities, and they'll say to you, oh, Alex, you've got this capability. I want you to do that. Or Rebecca, you're good at this. I want you to do that. Or Dan, that's your field. Can you go and fix that? So you won't see roles defined so hard. And like I see that in the consulting side, because that's what we do. We have to say, when we put together a team, we say, well, what are you good at? We need these sort of capabilities. Okay, we need him, and we need her, and we need him, and we probably need a little bit of him because he's really good at that. So they're brought for their capabilities. So when we go to do work at organizations around that, we bring capabilities. And I think organizations have to think, how do we do that? But then it's about, how do you train people, and how do you build careers? Because again, it's about people. How do you talk in an AI world which is moving so fast? How do you bring young people along and say, well, actually, your career, you've no idea what's going to be like, but actually, we'd like you to start doing this because you think you've got core capabilities and you can be a leader of the future.
Do you think there's resistance to change management from your group of employees because they're fearful that if they do get on board with utilizing new systems and processes with AI, that actually they're going to put themselves out of a job or a career entirely? And I know you've mentioned obviously new careers coming in that we haven't even thought of, but are there as many new careers and as many new jobs as there are people in the workforce?
I think there's two ways to look at AI. There's looking at AI through the lens of efficiency, right? And everyone says, right, we're going to drive efficiency through AI. And I think that is such a toxic way to have a start an AI conversation, because fundamentally it says we are going to train your replacement, we are not going to grow, and we're fundamentally going to stand still and do things cheaper until we are basically drive ourselves into efficiency non-existence. The other lens to look through is growth. We're going to drive a growth first agenda with AI. We're going to be bigger, we're going to be better, we're going to do more things. Fundamentally, that will drive a huge amount of efficiency. But what you'll see from the workforce is immediately lean into it. Brilliant. If I can basically automate my job away, then I get to go and be part of the next big thing.
Exactly right.
They lean into it.
They do, yeah.
Rather than, because it is, and I'm not gonna lie, I've seen some real head in the sand behaviors from some really senior execs who are just like, oh, no one's scared of AI. It's fine. I'm like, you are kidding yourself.
But I think there is a fear. There of course, isn't, because we're human. Of course we're worried about, like, how am I going to pay my mortgage? I'm going to lose my. Of course they are, but I think that's down to how you lead it, and you're absolutely right. How do you talk about it in your organization?
Yeah.
How do leaders show those values and say, how can they just be open and say, well, actually, I don't know what's going to look like in a couple of years' time, but I know as a leader, my responsibility is to make sure that I get you through this, and I try my best to explain to you how good this is going to be for our organization and how it's going to change, and it'll be hard, but actually, we're quite in it together, because that's never the case. But you have to talk about
We're a
it.
family.
You have to talk. No, don't. No, absolutely not. But it is about how you talk about it and how you lead it, and that's change management.
From my experience, generally, I'm generalizing here, there's absolutely people that may feel differently, but generally across the board, I haven't actually seen that much resistance if they feel like they're part of the change and part of the transformation that's going on. So I think it comes back to your point about change management, but not only communicating with people about what's coming up, but actually co-creating it with them.
Yes.
And co-designing it with them and
100%.
allowing them being part of that
100%.
change. And then they'll be bought in from day one, rather than feeling like it's happening to them.
Thrust upon them.
Yes.
So people hate change being done to them. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But you're right about co-creating. So one of the things that we always encourage clients to, and this is what I'm doing with the internal projects at the moment, is to say, okay, well, we're going to France. Okay, I want you to give me 6 names from the practice who are going to help me to do this. And they're going to go, you're going to be the champions. You're going to be the evidence to your colleagues. You're going to talk to your colleagues about it. I can be in the background helping you with some of the more detail, so being involved in it and feeling that they're part of it and feeling that they can direct it in some way, and particularly around the cultural parts of it, because often, and it certainly was the case for us, we're US owned. So in the past, change was, here you go. And we go, well, actually, that's not going to actually work in Europe because of X, Y, and Z. And they go, well, it works in the US. And I said, that's the point. So that cultural element, and allowing, like I was in France last week, Lily knows this, but they were really, really important to have them on side. And to understand, like, it's different in the UK, it's different in the US, but actually, how do we make it so that it works for the French group as well, without having wholesale change for the core systems? You'll appreciate that. So it's a little bit of configurability rather than adaptation. And that was fine. But bringing them on that, so they feel, okay, I've been involved in this, I've been consulted, I've been part of it, I've been able to have my opinion heard, I've made a small change. It makes such a difference. It's so simple. It makes such a difference.
Touching upon the training point, which I know is on everyone's minds constantly, about how they can constantly build their skill set, and you build a skill set and then something comes up the next day or the following month and you're constantly playing catch up. And that's the new reality. We all need to get very, very comfortable with that. But I wonder whether, and I'd love to get your views on this, whether the concept of change, the concept of training needs to adapt to the new norm. So when we traditionally think about training, we think about training in skills, but we're talking a lot about capability. And if capability is to be developed in a human, to almost in a workforce, to almost look at themselves as an identity in the workforce and be able to fluidly move around based on business demands and what's needed from them, is there a training element in the mindset shift that's required? Do we need to start building a mindset capability in our people in order for them to recover constantly from this need to constantly learn new things, and that actually be expired in a couple of months?
Funny enough, I'm literally talking at Cambridge tomorrow, and the fundamental kind of key part of my talk is all about the skills you require for the future
Yes.
in AI, and it's not, there's zero technical skill
The
required.
skills in AI or the skills to complement
use,
AI?
well, in and to use.
Okay.
But fundamentally, as a group of executives in this MBA course, I want them to walk away knowing that probably the number one skill you need, above and beyond everything, to inspire into your people is curiosity.
I knew you would
Thank
say
you.
that.
Because
I'm really pleased you said that.
AI is such a superpower now that you just need to be curious. If
Yes.
you're curious,
Yes.
you can analyze data like a data scientist now, because you just got to be curious enough to ask the right question.
Exactly.
If you want to discover something, you just need to be curious enough to work with the AI for long enough for it to kind of just spit out the right answer. There are some other attributes, like I really encourage people to be good distributors of, delegators. People are rubbish delegators, but actually we've got this AI workforce now that we can delegate jobs to. You need to be a good evaluator. You need to be good at synthesizing information. You need to be good at, understanding information. Or I often talk about like this new flipping of the job description, flipping from all the skills, the need to have skills. You must have this long using this tool and this long using this tool. And the nice to haves on the bottom of the CV that no one ever really cares about, like you need to be a good communicator, a good manager, this, that, and the other. That's totally flipping on its
That's
head in
what
my
I
world.
was really angling
Yeah.
with Rebecca earlier. That whole set is going to change.
Yeah.
But interesting. So one of the things I say, because I do a lot of mentoring for the younger community, and I say you just got to be curious. Like
Curiosity.
just be curious.
and it's the one thing that the kids, having kids myself, it's one thing that kids are lacking at scale is curiosity. If I literally say to the girls, figure out how to do this, I'm like, just watch a YouTube video, Google it. You've all got access to AI. Yes, this panic look of like, how the hell do I do that? And I'm like, just be 1% curious and you'll be fine. Be 10% curious and you'll get any job in the world today. Be as curious as kind of like we are, and you'll just stand out. Like
It's really interesting given that we have more resources at our fingertips than ever, but you're saying the younger generation are more fearful to
because they're
I think it's
fed.
mixed. I think there's mixed. I think it's quite mixed actually, because like it sounds like yours are younger. So mine is my
20 and 18.
So my lad's
not that young.
25, right? And he's quiet, but he's always been very curious. Fantastic reader since he was tiny, and always full of questions. Sometimes I'll be going. I come in from work and he'd say, "Dad," I'm like, "Oh Jesus!" but I gave that to him, and so he's always been curious about lots of different things. So I think that it's very mixed. You're right about people being bombarded. I mean, I would have hated to being I'd hate to be a young person today, growing up in an environment where you just have information overload at your fingertips all the time. Because at least, when I was growing up, you had your brain, you could kind of figure out, well, I'm interested in this, I'm going to find out about that and whatever. So it's much harder for them today, but I think it's very mixed, because I see very different traits being very important now. So when we talk about training, and I think I talked to Lily about this before, when we did the work with the LSE, we're going to do another round of it, and the theme for the next year is going to be, how do we get organizations to focus on the traits and capabilities that their workforce will need to complement how AI is going to do a lot of the work that they do today. And how do you shift that? How do you turn that CV upside down to say, actually, they have these capabilities or these kind of skills? Because it's all about leadership, and it's all about developing, an ability to adapt and to be able to learn new stuff, to do different jobs. But it's, what are the traits? So you're absolutely right. But curiosity is
king.
Absolutely key.
Everything we're listing here, I totally agree with what we're all saying. But traditionally, they've been much, much harder to measure. So when you
Yeah.
think about
Yes.
organization setup,
Yes.
how have we traditionally rewarded employees? How have we measured performance? It's always been much more technical skill based and looking back at your previous
I agree.
performance to date. Whereas what we're talking about here is having to kind of measure and assess those much more behavioral skills that you can't necessarily see on a piece of work that you've demonstrated. It's more about that kind of proactivity, the way that you're working every day. Think about urgency, curiosity, that ability to kind of just
Innovate and
and I want to say use your initiative, but I'm not sure that's
No,
quite
it is.
the right.
No, it is. It is
Yeah.
because I think historically, the people who've hit their performance levels have always done those things on top of their core objectives. So their behaviors and their values, and that they're curious and they're innovative and they bring new ideas. I think it's just language actually. So I think you can assess it, because if you're a good manager and you have maybe a manageable group, say you've got 8, traditional models, 8 would be the max. How you engage with them on a regular basis to monitor how they're getting on, you'll know what they're doing.
Well,
And you
if
know,
you don't, you need to.
Oh yeah, well you just need to give up. You should know what they're doing, and you should be able to assess how innovative are they, how curious are they, what are they doing that's slightly different to the next person. And I genuinely think you can assess that.
Yeah, but it needs to then therefore be much more real time,
Absolutely.
regular
Oh yeah,
feedback loop.
absolutely.
forward-looking.
This is where you could use AI. You could literally have it listening
go.
to those check-ins and consistently,
yeah.
There you go.
continually analyze and understand, and provide that real-time, not scoring, but that real-time intelligence
Yeah,
to help
absolutely.
you better.
Yeah.
Almost be like a little AI side coach.
It's brilliant, based on your one-to-one.
Yeah.
I like that.
There you go.
And you can bring actions out of it, and that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Patent David Fern.
So, I think you're going to have to be fast on that one.
Can I say one more thing?
Please,
One more thing.
go ahead.
So we were talking about structures, and I wrote down here traditional structures, and I put across. So I think traditional structures that certainly I've grown up with in organizations are slowly breaking down. So there'll be new structures in how we work and how we engage, and we were seeing it already. But again, the power of AI is just so untapped.
Fascinating to explore it one over a beer, because I think that might take longer than we've got left on the podcast.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Because I'm a big believer in that, but I'm also a believer in to introduce AI in a meaningful way, or introduce change in a meaningful way, retaining as much of the commonality and mental model that people have built up of the organization and the structure, so they can understand how change fits in and what's going to be affected in a logical way in their brains, is so important.
It is important for now, but I think that will change once because, and I don't know how it will change, but I do genuinely think that it will change.
I hope it changes, because I think there's a lot more optimal models if we can convince organizations to embrace them.
So I think our working lives, your working lives will be different.
Some of them were,
And your children's will be, and my son's.
Oh,
My son will have a
fundamentally
portfolio career, and he'll be doing stuff in 5 years' time that he has no idea about today.
I'd like to move us on from what adaptability strain looks like and talk about what's actually driving it underneath. So when organizations experience the kind of pressure that you've been talking about, do you think that's because humans have reached the limit to how much change they can absorb? Or do you think it's because of how we've historically designed work, which we've spoken about, and incentives and decisions and structures?
I want to ask a question on top of that, which is, and I think it encompasses a lot of the questions I have about that question, which is, who is ultimately accountable for successful change in an organization?
Very good question. Thank you, David.
Who's ultimately accountable?
Yeah, who's accountable for change? I'm going to leave it there, because I don't want to lead the witness.
From our client's perspective, it's the chief executive officer,
Okay.
because he's responsible for agreeing the strategy with the board and for delivering that strategy. And strategy will always include change. So from our perspective, so he might delegate some of that responsibility, but ultimately he has accountability for it.
Yeah.
In my view.
Okay.
Or she.
Or she, I beg your pardon, or she.
Because the way I see it is everyone's accountable for change.
Oh
I
yeah,
think one of the
ultimately.
biggest,
Oh
but
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
this needs to be shouted out, because too often it is one team, one person, one manager, whereas actually when we're talking about this everyone's going to change, and therefore we have to have change targets at an individual contributor level, at a like team leader level, and I think actually thinking about that and measuring that, to your point earlier on, measuring how do we, you know, how do we make everyone accountable for change in some way, shape, or form, so the whole organization has an accountability.
Yeah.
I think that's really important, because I think too often that's the message, is it's the CEO's responsibility, and the problem is a lot of people who aren't necessarily, you know, in early parts of their career are going, well, I'm fine, I'll just wait for him to tell me what to do.
But you see, the problem is, with some CEOs, they say, well, yeah, well, it's the head of change. He's responsible for it. And I'm going, or she's responsible for it. And I'm going, no, you're responsible for it because you're accountable to the board.
Yeah.
So that's the difference, I think, that where I see the challenge with clients is, and I've seen this, and they say, oh yeah, well, I'm saying, well, who's going to be responsible for it? And they say, oh, it's the CIO, and I'm going, I don't think it is. I think it's you, and I think the CIO has a big part to play, but so has his change team, and so have the technology people are going to deliver it. But actually, you know,
And just I like everyone being responsible for change, because I ultimately think everyone's going to have their part to play in it.
Yeah, 100%.
One of the challenges, though, going back to your question, I think that we're seeing at the moment is we think we know what we need to do when it comes to transformation and change, but it's changing so much that then when you're thinking about everyone being accountable for that, how do you make sure there is clarity for every single teammate across your business? I mean, you were saying your business has 180,000 people across it. How do you create clarity for everyone across the business when it could arguably be changing every quarter, when you think about the speed and the pace of AI and how that's transforming things?
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a challenge which
Blows my mind.
I don't have the answer for.
No, neither do I.
I don't think anyone does at this stage. My question to that would be, okay, if everyone is responsible, and I agree with it, if everyone is responsible for change, does that create a situation where, because everyone is responsible and because it's the masses, no one actually changes?
I didn't use the word responsible. I used the word accountable.
Accountable, yeah.
That changes. I think that changes the meaning of it.
It does, yeah.
Because accountability means that you have some target, some metric, some way of measuring that you are being a change agent of some description. I think when you flip the coin and say, like, who's responsible, it shifts the issue, because you could be responsible but not ultimately not accountable.
Yeah, it feels chaotic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So if you are all accountable, does it still get done though?
I think once again, you got to dissect it down to manageable chunks, and the receptionist can't be accountable for the overall change, but they can be accountable for what they own. And actually, I think by empowering them to own the change of what they own, it will ultimately contribute to the overall change in a very positive way.
Understood.
You have to define it for them, though. You have to be very specific.
Yes.
Absolutely have to define it.
To your point, it actually almost has to be in their scorecards. Yeah. Okay, as part of your objectives, we're doing this big change, and that's what you've got to do. And the best organizations do that because they drop them down into the pyramid. The worst ones go, you look after that, won't you? And it's not nobody's scorecard. So all of a sudden, nobody goes, well.
Yeah, and I think it's. And I think when we talk about AI, where we are fundamentally introducing a ground up swell of new capabilities and intelligence, everyone has to be accountable, and everyone has to have, to your point, a very well defined understanding of, right, you're going to change because your job needs to change in this way to enable you to do this, to be able to move on to the next thing. I just think that there's, and this is why I keep coming back to it. I think this is one of the biggest missing elements. And by the way, I hadn't thought of this before I got in this room, so this has been something that's kind of come from just listening to these experts, is that actually by making everyone accountable for change in a way that is measured and kind of quantifiable, it could be the unlock to actually getting adoption of AI. I mean, I'm being very selfish and kind of using this whole thing just to kind of like get my own thoughts straight. But I think it could be a real powerful
It's a
move.
combination though. You can't just use the big stick. You know, you have to. It has to be something that they feel, actually, this is good for me. Can't be just you'll do this because it's your objectives. And if you don't, you won't get any variable
Yeah.
pay. It has to be a combination of this is actually really good for you,
Yeah.
and bring them along and say, actually, to make it transparent, we're going to give you a few targets.
Yeah.
You
I think
know, it's much easier
yeah.
to do it that way.
It leads back to my growth first agenda though as well, which is if
Yes.
you can align it to
Yeah.
growth,
It's growth.
you can align it to personal growth, you can align it to career growth, you can align it to job expansion, whatever it may be. That for me is the personal benefit.
Well, and going back to that co-creation point, that everyone should be their own chief learning officer and be able to come up with those as well, rather than
absolutely.
leadership setting it for
Absolutely.
everyone.
that, yeah.
The thing that we say to all of our community is that the only person in this room, and I typically the only person in this room who's going to worry about your career is you. I can help you,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to worry about your career. I'm going to worry about my own career.
Great point.
So that has to be, people need to understand that.
Yeah.
That it's about being curious.
Yeah.
And it's about being curious about where can I go and okay, and you can come to me and I can help you, but actually you're responsible for your career.
I like it.
One final question before we go into the final failure round, as we're calling it. Based on that, how would you then define the dynamic or relationship between a leadership and teams within an organization, the modern organization?
How do you mean?
How would you define the new dynamic? Because
the
obviously
new
there is
dynamic.
there is a
Okay.
new dynamic between a leadership team based on what you've just described
Yeah.
in terms of the way that they need to be engaging their teams and the way that they need to be dissecting change and being very clear and transparent on it. Surely that then moves into a new dynamic between a
does.
leadership
Yeah,
and a team.
I understand what you're saying.
And
yeah.
when you're in an organizational matter, how do you define that dynamic? Because clearly in the past, traditionally, we've had job descriptions, a set of skills, KPIs, we incentivize you based on that. You need to deliver. You don't, you're not performing. Now that we've got all this nuance between capability and mindset and being your own chief learning officer and constantly having to be responsible and accountable for your own change, what's the dynamic between leaders and teams?
I actually think it will lead to flatter structures across businesses, and therefore more opportunities for people. I think that there's going to have to be more independence, and that I think if you look back historically, leadership means you make the decisions and you delegate work and you're the taskmaster, whereas I think people are going to have a lot more autonomy, or if you know they want that, then the option will be there to have a lot more autonomy, a little bit more of a co-creative collaborative dynamic between leadership and employees, and almost actually bridging that gap in a lot of ways.
I definitely think it'll be flatter. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And the autonomy, I think, will be there because the younger generation are demanding flexibility in work anyway. So that autonomy and being able to, not quite set their own goals, but have some latitude to actually fit in their learning and their curiosity in what they're supposed to deliver. So they get that. So I think they'll definitely be flatter. I think one of the things that's missing in leadership today is that, and I don't know which one of you said it, but I think there's some of the leaders are being a bit, I think it was you that said it, some leaders are being a bit blind to the whole thing, the challenge to it. And actually, I think that masks a fear on their own part, and that they're just, that's just too hard. I'm not going to do that. And some of them, and we've talked to some of the older community, and I can say that because I'm in that community, like in their 60s, who are the top end of their careers, but actually they're kind of they're timing it out. They're not going to change because the structures today suit them. So there's a little bit of self-preservation going on. And I think that will crumble really quickly in the next couple of years.
What is one leadership mindset shift operators should adopt tomorrow? And that is a tongue twister.
Thankfully, I think my answer is pretty definitive and has been articulated well. Growth first mindset.
I like it.
I'm trying to think of a more inspiring word for it, but ultimately better communication. I think the need for communication is only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger when you think about the more transformation, autonomy that we're going to be seeing across.
Nature hates a vacuum. That's what we found. If you don't communicate, you leave a vacuum for people just to fill it with their own theories.
That's always been the case.
That is in AI. That is a bad place to be.
But that's human nature. That's been the same for thousands of years, you know. So I think for me, for leadership, is that continuous change mindset.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they need to, but communication at the root of it, because I think most of these, certainly in larger organizations, the traditional leadership structure has typically kept the teams away from the you know, and it's very much an us and them, and that just has to change because those organizations will not survive.
Finally, what is one change in how organizations design work or decisions that will materially improve people's ability to adapt while still performing?
I think the whole idea about people being in a fixed role in organizations needs to change. I think there needs to be a little bit more flexibility, but that means that people have to be more adaptable, but that takes a while. I think people should be much more about their capabilities, and they should almost be like, not quite, you know, consulting firms, but okay, I've got 100 people in my organization, and I know what they're all good at, and I can choose them to do what needs doing for a 3-month cycle, and so they learn a lot more. They're more adaptable. They actually just become change. That mindset just becomes the norm for them. I think work can go that way. Not all organizations, but lots of organizations can go that way.
So designing work rather than it being
Rather than
stay in
having
your lane
role-based.
and become an expert, build skill set for 25 years and go up the ladder. It's have a bunch of capabilities and be fluid across the business in accordance to business demand.
Yes.
Absolutely agree with that. And the job architecture that you've built around that is going to be challenging, but I think it's important. And I'd say one of the more immediate things that businesses need to be looking at is, you know, we're talking about a lot of ambitious, exciting stuff here. But ultimately, if you're going to start making these changes and putting it into your business, you need to stop doing some things first as well. So looking at the work that's not adding a lot of value, what can AI replace? Make sure you're not just putting more and more and more into your teams, because ultimately, if you want curiosity, if you want innovation, then people need the brain capacity to do that. And we know a lot of change creates burnout. So what are you going to stop doing and then start to do the fun stuff?
Bang on.
So I've round this off with, I think organizations need to actually embrace an entrepreneurial approach to their staff. And actually, if you treat each member of your staff like they run their own little bit of the business, like they have some ownership, some control over even a small amount of P&L or anything like that, where you can give them some level of entrepreneurial freedom, you will be rewarded very, very, very well by it.
Amazing answers. Thank you so much. It's been an incredible discussion.
Pleasure.
We will link everything that you've talked about, studies, whether you agreed with them or not, in the show notes, and links to what you're working on so people can connect with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
a
What a pleasure.
What was fascinating to hear throughout that episode was that despite the differences in industries and backgrounds, businesses of all shapes and sizes are facing a very, very real and very similar issue.
The discussion concluded that adaptability, the ability to continuously adapt to change, is no longer just a human problem, but it's a leadership problem. And that spans the organizational problem.
It's been so much fun. Thank you so much for co-hosting with me.
What a pleasure.
We can't wait to see you for the next one. Stay tuned.